much. I also want to thank James for his invitation and all the people who have organized this conference. And I also must apologize because my English is awful. So I try to speak in English, but it's a real problem for me. I'm going to talk about the history of portrait parlé as developed by Alphonse Bertillon in the last decades of the 19th century, initially at Paris, at the Paris Prefecture of Police. First, I will underline the importance of the portrait parlé in the facial feature-based identification on individuals by the police. And after that, I will analyze the impact of the portrait parlé on the identification, control, and surveillance of individuals by the authorities. So, first, a revolution in policing, the portrait parlé. I will speak before Bertillon what was the way to interpret the face before Bertillon. Throughout history, self-proclaimed scientific theories have attempted to explain the dangerousness of certain individuals on the basis of specific facial or cranial features. For example, we say in French physiognomy, maybe it's physiognomy in English, and also phrenology, developed by Lavater, but also Gall, Franz Joseph Gall, has established a direct relationship between singular facial features and the moral dimensions of the individuals. By the same logic, Cesare Lombroso, Italian scientific, in his book Criminal Man, defined criminal types on the basis of specific anatomical characteristics. According to him, according to Lombroso, for example, thieves have small wandering eyes, thick and close eyebrows, thin beards and hair, etc., as you see. Besides that, since the Middle Ages, authorities had been trying to capture the face feature of some individuals in writing in order to ascertain their identity. Historian Valentin Grobner explained in his book, Who Are You?, how authorities produced at that time a list of fugitive and wanted placard posters containing face descriptions. French historian called Vincent Denis, you can see his book Une histoire de l'identité en France, a history of identity in France, adds that from the 16th century onward, authorities also produced a number of registers containing face description to identify deserters, deserters on the run, vagrants, and beggars. Later on, some identity documents, such as the livret ouvrier, employment record book, maybe we can traduce like that, still feature a description of the holder's face. However, as you can see, the livret ouvrier. However, until the last 3 decades of the 19th century, identifying individuals on the basis of description of their facial features remained complicated for the authorities, as quite often only the most conspicuous traits were mentioned. The vocabulary was usually poor, as you can see. What is exactly a naval face? And no searchable filing system had been invented to classify methodically the collected data. With Bertillon, there is a big change. First, we are going to see the importance of the portrait parlé in the Bertillonage. From the early 1880s onward, at the Paris Prefecture of Police, Alphonse Bertillon developed a new and rational method called Bertillonnage for identifying delinquents and criminals. His approach is based on measuring bones to obtain quantitative data that could be used to identify individuals, but also a method for collecting unique body characteristics. As you can see, scars and stigmata on everyone's body, standardized fast profile photograph, mugshots, but also portrait parlé, the portrait parlé, to break down the human face into elements that could be minutely described and classified according to a detailed typology on each element. With the portrait parlé, each element is analyzed with great precision in terms of its complexion, structure, shape, size, and using a novel vocabulary featuring a number of symbols or abbreviations, as you can see. For example, Bertillon considered the ear as a fingerprint of the human face. That's why he identified and classified about 100 different types of ears that varied in shape and size. But also, as you see, he described and classified with the same logic the nose, the forehead, the iris, the hair, etc., etc. With Bertillon, a new way of looking at things is developing that allows the police to avoid any approximation. For Bertillon, this new vision would allow the police, as he writes, to better describe, but by the same token, better see and better remember. Bertillon thus presented his portrait parlé as epitomizing the dynamics of modern policing. Bertillon ensured a quick domestic and international dissemination of the portrait parlé, thanks to scientific papers translated into several languages, publicity in mass circulation press, but also international exposures, in particular by using a backlit photography display case, this one, very big one. Also, the creation in Paris of a description of an anthropometric recognition class for a great many French and foreign magistrates, but also policemen from all over the world. This global dissemination of the portrait parlé opened a range of new possibilities for police forces through the world, as we are going to see. Towards a new form of identification, control, and surveillance. And first, creating massive records on criminals and fostering the transnational exchange of police information. The portrait parlé was a key element of Bertillonnage. The Bertillonnage was a method that allowed the French policing authority to ascertain the identity of multiple offenders who were to be, at this time, deported in Guyana, French Guiana, but also New Caledonia. From 1893 onward, the bearer's portrait parlé was scrupulously written down on each of the fiches parisiennes, called Parisian cards. Parisian cards that were to be centralized in Paris by the new Service Parisien de l'Identité Judiciaire, the Paris Judicial Identity Department, created by Bertillon. On these Parisian cards, the use of the portrait parlé, but also the standard photographic portrait as well, made identity fraud very difficult. The scheme can be analyzed as a process that targeted the body directly. The superiority of its scientific knowledge gave the police a definite advantage over crime. A process whereby ever increasing amounts of personal data got accumulated, codified, and standardized. And a process that required the development of a novel form of police classification for a huge quantity of personal data. That's why Bertillon invented an anthropometric method of classification of data. Because the portrait parlé was being used as a common language by many police forces from various countries, it facilitated the efficient exchange of information throughout the world, as you can see. For example, this common language made it easier, for instance, to send now standardized description of criminals from France to the US and back at this time, in order to identify criminals trying to cross a border under a false identity. As you can see, the rise of the telephone, but also the rise of the telegraph in the late 19th century, accelerated the process. The turn of the century saw the development of numerous systems for numerically encoding the portrait parlé, further boosting this remote international policing trend. The portrait parlé was used not only to identify criminals, but also increasingly large section of the population that were considered suspicious or even dangerous. As you can see, the portrait parlé was used at the morgue. It was used in French prisons. It was used overseas to control over colonized populations. And it was used to identify wanted persons, fugitive, missing person, terrorist, etc. The French Ministry of Interior, Ministère de l'Intérieur, launched a bulletin hebdomadaire de police criminelle, a weekly criminal police journal that contained a collection of portraits parlés and photographs. The portrait parlé was increasingly used in order to make it easier to spot suspicious individuals, also in the public space. That's why Bertillon created an album called Album Décalé, a portable album used by the police to visually identify wanted and banned persons, anarchists, escapees, etc., on the streets, in railway stations, at borders, etc. Another contribution of the portrait parlé to this new method of policing by identity was to help tamper-proof the IDs, the identity cards. that some section of the population had an obligation to carry, so that they would be more easily tracked and supervised. Such was, for instance, as you can see, le carnet anthropométrique des nomades, the anthropometric notebook for gypsies, who was created legally in France in 1912. Many other countries, for example, Brazil, as you can see, subsequently decided to use Bertillon portrait parlé to tamper-proof their now compulsory IDs, passports in particular. In France, in 1921, the Paris prefect of police created the first carte d'identité de Français, the first national ID card. That also included the portrait parlé. The préfet de police de Paris, the Paris prefect of police, wanted that this document became compulsory for all citizens. But it was denounced at that time as a generalized attempt at embertillonning the population, embertillonnage de la population. That's why the prefect of police made the ID non-compulsory. But as early 1940, the authoritarian regime of Vichy did make it compulsory and even used this document directly to repress both the Jews and the resistance fighters that were called terrorists at this time. In conclusion, the historical logic discussed above show that the new method developed from the 19th century to determine and to freeze individual identities through face recognition played a major role in the consolidation of the state power by universally imposing new individuality codes first, exploiting massive amounts of personal data, deploying new logic for control, surveillance, and tracking of individuals, classifying populations in terms of their supposed dangerousness, and promoting science and technique as a privileged answers to insecurity issues. With the rise of biometrics, facial recognition, these logic are now fully at work. This modern-day application often seems to reactivate some of the aforementioned issues. Potential violation of civil liberties and privacy, anonymity in the public space is being challenged, and everyone seems to compelled by a sweeping wave of suspicion to offer the authorities guarantees of transparency. However, as we have seen this morning, current biometric facial recognition techniques seems to be raising issues of their own. The technical possibilities they open now make it possible to implement ever more massive and intrusive forms of instance of surveillance. These techniques are no longer being produced and used only by public authorities, but also by private players, as we have seen, that are showing a growing interest in what is, after all, a juicy market. These techniques are increasingly used to identify deviant or suspicious behaviors, but against which criteria, however, is dangerousness being currently assessed. Specific troubles, specific attitude, specific country, what is dangerous. Finally, with these techniques, are we not completely redefining the very notion of identity? As automated biometrics controls rely more on encoded physical clues captured directly on the body than on an evolving identity built from constant social interaction with others that give attention to spoken word. And I will finish like that. I can answer your question, but my English is too bad, okay? I will answer in French. It's not a problem for you.